Well, today we are going to speak about Parsha Vayigash. It's a very interesting turning point Parsha. We see that, and it has a lot to do with exile and behavior in exile and how people think in exile. First, we have that Yosef has been in a certain way in exile all this time that we've been talking about him because he was sold into slavery. And there he is in Egypt, and that's definitely a kind of exile. And how is he handling that? Then we have the brothers who are now in Egypt. So let's see what we learn about handling the behavior of exile. What is it that we're expected to do in exile? How do these role models handle exile themselves? So this week's Torah portion opens with a dramatic confrontation. In a series of events that began in last week's Torah portion, after a 22-year separation, Yosef's brothers appear before him unexpectedly. And they've traveled to Egypt because of a famine, and they're requesting provisions. The brothers are unaware of Yosef's identity, but he recognizes them. He understands their language, Hebrew, but he communicates to them through an interpreter. Because he does a series of tests to ascertain whether or not the brothers have changed their ways from when they heartlessly sold him into slavery. So all the while, they think that he's an Egyptian leader and not their brother. So we are in this situation where the truth is that Yosef is their brother, even though he's the leader. Other than the Pharaoh, he is the top leader of Egypt. And we see that the brothers are in a position where this viceroy is giving them a very hard time. Of course, we understand that he's testing them to see if they have changed. So there they are. The 12 sons of Jacob are all together with some interpreters and officials. And 11 of the brothers face the Egyptian viceroy, whom they don't know is their long lost brother Yosef. Now, Yosef is saying that his younger brother Benjamin, will have to stay in Egypt while the rest can go back to their father. So that's the test he's giving. The brothers come from different mothers, the same father, and Yosef and Benjamin come from Rachel. These are the two that come from the same mother, and they have a special connection. And Yaakov, who truly loved Rachel, he will be heartbroken if Benjamin is going to be taken into captivity in Egypt. And he's the youngest son and seems to be, because he thinks that Yosef is not alive, seems to be the only surviving offspring of his beloved departed wife, Rachel. Now, actually, her other son, Yosef, is still alive and right there in the room, but nobody knows this. So the brothers are in pain, but they're powerless. Can they really do something? Now, this whole situation is very strange. A lot is hidden. Yosef has been in command of the Egyptian economy by Pharaoh, which is a huge, powerful position for a member of Jacob's family. But at this time, the future Jewish people were at this stage just an extended family group. It was Jacob, who was Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob, and his sons and grandchildren. That was the entire family that was the Jewish family that was going to become the Jewish people. And for a member of this family to rise to be the viceroy was remarkable. And so Yosef represents a kind of power And that power has to do with being able to relate to the world. He's able to be a businessman, not only a shepherd who meditates, but a person who does undoubtedly meditate and connect to God, always connected to God, but he's able to do whatever he needs to do in the world. So his power is unique, and God brought him to the highest place of power that he could possibly be in. And he's saying, Binyamin is not going anyplace. You can all go, and he is going to stay. Now, what happens in this place in the Parsha is very interesting. Now, we have to remember where Yehuda is at this moment. He and his 10 brothers, they are one family. Here he is in Egypt. What power does he have? That's a question. What power does he have? Because he can't, in terms of being outnumbered, there's no question, the entire Egyptian people is there. And he and his 10 brothers are together. But he has decided that he will not allow Benjamin to be taken captive. So at this point, Yehuda steps forward to talk to Yosef, who he thinks is the viceroy and doesn't know is his brother. Now, Yehuda had promised his father that he will take responsibility for his youngest brother, Benjamin, and only on that basis had he been permitted by his father to take the boy to the aggressive Egyptian viceroy who insisted on seeing him. Now, we come to a place here where Yehuda steps up to the plate. He steps up to the viceroy and in a very insistent tone, says partially asking like pleading, but definitely very strong, pleading that Benjamin should be allowed to go back home and he himself will stay as a slave of Joseph. Now, Yehuda is insistent, and that's so amazing, and it's such a statement to us about how he handles this. The sages say that Yehuda was ready to face any odds. He would not accept the idea that Benjamin would remain in Egypt, and he would fight to the death in order to bring him home. So this is fascinating. This is another kind of power. And actually, Yehuda's power is greater than that of Yosef. Yehuda decides, this is what's going to be. I'm not putting up with this. Yosef had a limited political power due to having been put in his position by the Pharaoh. And he held his line about he's not giving up until he sees that his brothers have actually done tshuva. Have they repented for their behavior? So he's holding his line. But Yehuda has a different kind of force. And he's coming with the force of right. What is right based on the Torah? Beyond any other form of authority. So Yehuda is going to stand up and say, this is right. This is Torah. This is what needs to be. I'm not going to allow you to do this. And it's fascinating that with this approach, Yehuda was able to confront Yosef and was ready to face the Pharaoh himself if need be. So in a way, his approach was beyond nature. This is very important. We're talking about how to handle exile, because they're in Egypt. That's already the beginning. It's about to become the beginning of exile. And Yehuda is like David facing Goliath. He stands up and he is going to war. He's not going to put up with this unfair, unjust behavior. And he's getting up and he's ready to fight no matter what. Also fascinating, and these are lessons that we need to learn because we're still in exile. He knew with certainty that God was on his side because he was doing what was right. And this gave him a strength which won through in the end. Because when he came out with that strength and he said, Binyamin's not staying here. Okay, don't get angry, but I have to tell you how it is. Binyamin is not staying here. If I'll stay here if you need somebody to stay, but not him. And that's not okay to do it that way. And so what happened was that when he did this, it changed the situation because Yosef saw that he had done tshuva and the brothers had done tshuva and that Yehuda was not willing to let another son, so to speak, die, that he was going to stand up and say, Binyamin goes to his father. And that's what it has to be. And what happened was that when he did this, Yosef was so touched to the core that he could see that repentance, that tshuva, that now he could reveal himself. And he revealed his identity, and the tension turned to tears of joy. So we see that the highest power was not Yosef, but Yehuda, who therefore was the ancestor of King David and ultimately the ancestor of Mashiach, of the Messiah. So Yehuda becomes the leader. And we saw in past parshas that he did things that were wrong. One of the things he did was wrong was he allowed Yosef to be sold, and he stood up for it, and he changed his ways, and he did tshuva. He changed what he did. And that was something that was extremely strong. And it's something that we also, all of these lessons are lessons for us, that if we're not handling things with the right attitude, we have to change our attitudes. And if we're not doing the right thing, we have to change it so we're doing the right thing. And we need to stand up for who we are and say who we are and do what we're here to do and do it and go forward. So this story, which took place more than 3,000 years ago, tells us something about ourselves, about what makes real power when a Jew is in a situation of challenge and change. So this tells us how we should focus ourselves in the ups and downs of our personal lives and in the conflicts facing the Jewish people in the world. So when Yehuda stands up with righteous indignation, coming from the clarity of what he needs to do, the situation changes. So he stands up with righteous indignation and he says, this is what needs to happen. And then the situation changes. And then, unable to restrain himself anymore, Yosef bursts out, revealing his true identity, saying, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. The brothers are shocked and terrified. They recognize that Yosef knows all that they did to harm him, and they feel defenseless. The brothers are stunned, completely speechless. Out of intense shame and fear of retaliation, they retreat and brace themselves for the worst. Now, that's another interesting situation. What happens when somebody is dealing with a person in their life who has not been fair to them, who has not treated them well? How do we relate to that? So miraculously, Yosef has no grudge against his brothers. Now, how did he manage that? When someone is unkind to you and treats you badly again and again and again for years, like we see, Yosef wound up 22 years they didn't see each other. Where was he all that time? He was in Egypt being a slave to other people. And that was because thanks to his brother selling him. So how could he not have a grudge? And that's very important for all of us because these are normal situations that people can go through. And he even comforts his brothers and lets them know that it wasn't they who controlled his fate. So instead, Yosef calms his brothers. And he says to them, don't be sad, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. In other words, he says, don't be sad and let it not trouble you that you sold me. So he's not hiding from the reality. They did sell him. So he doesn't say it never happened. No, he knows it happened. He says it happened. But what is his attitude? And what can we do with our attitudes to make a difference? And he says it was to preserve life, that God sent me here before you. In other words, his focus is not on that they sold him, but that God sent him. Yosef proceeds to convince them that his journey was actually a positive thing. Because it was only because he was sold into slavery in Egypt that he was now able to provide sustenance to his entire family. Instead of feeling anger, Yosef is gracious and understanding and forgiving. This is very important. This is very important. How do we handle this? What do we do when things are not the way we would like them to be? And we see that there are people that are not behaving as they should or could, or they really gave you a hard time for something. Then what? And we see what's really important is that underneath the surface drama of the story and the intentions and motives of the brothers lies an omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent God who was orchestrating events to fulfill a divine plan. So sometimes we don't like what's happening and we feel clearly this is not right, but it brings us into a situation where God has something in mind. Very often when a person goes through such a thing, it's like a test. That if we could say, this too comes from God, then we might look at it differently. King Solomon, who was the son of King David, who was said to be the wisest person in the world, he wore a signet ring. And on the signet ring were the initials for Gam Ze Ya'avor. This too shall pass. Why did he say this too shall pass? Well, the king of all of Israel, who built the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, who had an entire people to take care of and so much to do, and all kinds of situations, how could he do that without getting overwhelmed and saying, Gam Ze Ya'avor, this too shall pass? And then he would look at a signet ring and say, okay, this seems like a big situation, but it's going to pass. Let me just do what I need to do right now to take care of it. And with God's help, it will all work out and this will pass. So that's also a big secret of not getting overwhelmed. So this belief in the bigger picture and deeper meaning. So we have to put our minds in a place where we look at a bigger picture and a deeper meaning than what's going on, of what seemed like meaningless and tragic events, gave Yosef a sense of purpose, helping him to manage and cope with his ordeals and remain spiritually, emotionally, and mentally intact. Just knowing there's a bigger picture, God is with me, God placed me in this situation, This too is for the good. God has a plan here. I don't know what it is, but I know that I need to stick with knowing that this is from God and knowing that there is a bigger picture. And then we have a sense of purpose. And then we could say, and what can I do now? And what can I do here? And we see that with Yosef. And every place he was, he trusted God and said, and what can I do now? And what can I do here in this situation? How can I bring out the best in the situation? So this perspective is what enabled him to come out of 12 years in an Egyptian prison with peace of mind and the clarity of mind to continue showing up to do whatever he could to make a difference, which is actually what led him to be promoted to Viceroy of Egypt on the spot. So by saying, what can I do here? What can I do now? Instead of saying, oi, I'm in a prison, it's terrible. It's like, this is the worst exile. This is the lowest of the lowest. Instead of doing that, he said, I will not give up. I have a purpose in life. What is it that God wants me to do? And whatever God is showing me at this time is an opportunity to serve God in this moment. And when he finally saw his brothers, you have to understand, this was a very unclear situation to Joseph. He knew God sent him because all there is God. So wherever we are, and whatever situation we're in, God placed us in this situation. Knowing that is very important. God placed us in this situation. What can I do here? I can't solve the whole thing. I can't go out there and make it boom, gone. But what can I do? What makes a difference? Talking to God, saying, what is it that you would like me to do now? And looking at the situation and saying, here's an opportunity to do something good. I guess God must have said, if it's happening, it means God sent it to me. So when he saw his brothers, suddenly his story made sense. Remember that this whole story started with his dreams, that Joseph had dreams and he knew his brothers would, and his parents would bow down to him. And he didn't know what any of that meant. The next thing he knew, he was in Egypt, and what is going on here, he didn't understand. But when Joseph was able to see that he had narrated his story in a way that was empowering, it's very important. How do we see our story? How do we narrate our story? How do I understand what is going on? Rather than becoming a victim and being consumed with hatred and bitterness, Joseph was filled with strength and grace. So when a situation comes, we're talking about somebody who does not act properly, is not nice, and does things that are wrong, and maybe other people are affected by that. Instead of holding on to the bitterness, which is an emotion that is not abnormal, we could say, I let go of those emotions. I let go of holding on to that person's story, whatever it is. I am not a victim. God put me in this situation for whatever reason I don't know, but God did it. Then we're able to let go of the other people's bitterness and bad behavior instead of making it our bitterness. Just let that go and say, God knows what he's doing, and I don't, but I know that God's the boss over here, and that I want to be connected to God, and I'm going to do my part, whatever it is, whatever the story is. I don't know what the story is, but I know that the story is good because this is something God is doing for me. So Yehuda, so this is Joseph, how he handles all these years in prison, how he handles his life, and he doesn't hold on Now, does he occasionally have feelings? He does. He's a person. But he keeps saying, God, I'm giving this over to you. You put me here. This is the situation you placed me in. It has to be for the good. Now, Yehuda accomplished his purpose by coming from a vantage point of truth that he was willing to fight for. So he had a desire to stand up for God and for what was right. He stood up. He didn't think about, there's a lot of them and not a lot of me. He didn't do any of that. He just knew what was just and right, and that they had done something wrong. And now this viceroy was going to do something wrong, and something needed to change. And he stepped up to the plate. He said, okay, Benjamin goes, I'm okay to stay. But that's it. So his standing up for God and what was right, and not also, he didn't worry about how is this going to work out. He knew this has to work out because he was going to do the right thing. And he knew it would work out, and he was victorious. So Yosef survived years of hardship by recognizing that his experiences come from God for a purpose, whether you understood it or not, and for the dedication to keep showing up. So Yosef not only models genuine forgiveness, but even greater than that, transcendence. He goes beyond himself. He lets go of his negative feelings and work to find the bigger picture. So looking beyond himself to perceive a greater plan, he saw the unity between all the fragmented pieces of his life's puzzle. By doing so, rather than remaining bitter and stuck in the past, Yosef was able to move on with equanimity. So he has to say, I don't know why this happened. Doesn't make any sense to me, but this is where God placed me. This is what God did. And I'm going forward to live the kind of life that God wants me to live. That is my plan. That's who I am, and that's what I'm doing. And so he moves on. And so this is amazing. Now, the brothers meet in an extreme situation. Yosef waited to see if the brothers had changed from their anger and hostility to him. And Yehuda had to save his brother Benjamin in order to save him and his father Yaakov. And then suddenly everything changed. The challenges disappeared. The Egyptian tyrant was not a tyrant after all, but their brother who didn't want to harm them. Once the truth came out, the situation was clear, and all was revealed as having been planned by God for the good. There are times that we really don't understand what is going on, but we have to come from the best place we can in transcending the emotions and saying, this is from God, and God has a plan, and everything is for a purpose. And sometimes it's revealed why this happened and what God was doing. Not always do we see the whole picture, but sometimes we do. And here what happened was that when Yehuda confronts Yosef and Yosef reveals himself, suddenly the whole thing becomes clear. The brothers have bowed down, and now his whole family will come, and like the dream where they bow down to Yosef, suddenly he sees how everything is coming together, obviously with a plan from God. And that was something that he would not have understood at all. But Yosef and Yehuda were able to rise above themselves, to stop feeling bad about the situation, stop feeling bad about the people who are unkind to us. Or that doesn't mean that we don't stand up and say, this is not okay and this is not going to last, because this is not going to, I'm not going to put up with this, which we see Yehuda did. So I'm not putting up with this. Benjamin comes out. I can stay, but Benjamin does not stay here. So he was going to war for what needed to be done because he knew that that is God's truth. So we see Yosef and Yehuda rising above themselves, and each went beyond their feelings to recognize God in the picture and to recognize what needed to be done, even though it might not have been easy. So this whole concept of rising beyond our feelings is what both Yosef and Yehuda had to do in order to make it work. Their way of handling their challenges shows us role models of how we could live through our own lives. Situations can be multifaceted. Looking from the perspective of our feelings can be limited based on a projection of our personal wants, worries, or concerns, because we see that if Yosef would have been saying, what am I doing over here? I feel is not what I want, then he wouldn't have been able to go anyplace. And we see that Yehuda, if he would have been worried and said, how am I going to make this work? There's, many thousands of them, and there's, 10 of us. How's this going to work? He wouldn't have been able to do it. But when they rise above their feelings and they say, this is what I have to do, God put me in this situation, then it changes. Then we could reflect on the situation, looking from a higher perspective, and see that there is more to be perceived outside of ourselves, that we are part of a larger purpose and plan. It's very important for us to understand that we are part of a larger purpose and plan. Otherwise, everything doesn't make any sense. We might, and some from the Torah tells us what the plan is. And so in many ways, we do know what the plan is, if we do know enough Torah to be able to know that. But we have to know that there is a plan, there is a purpose. We don't always see the steps that it's taking. So we don't understand, why does it need to be like this? But we need to keep going forward, recognizing that we are, as a whole, part of a larger plan and individually part of that larger plan. And we have to ask, what is it that I can do? So we learn from both Yosef and Yehuda how to go forward. So here, through the meeting of Yosef and Yehuda and his brothers, Yosef was able to tell them it's God who caused him to go to Egypt. And he makes it clear that the purpose of his descent to Egypt was to become its ruler. Not that he knew that for most of the time. So that Yaakov and his children would be sustained during the famine. He didn't know that for many years when he worked for the Potiphars, when he was in prison. He had no clue what this is all about. And when he comes to Pharaoh and he becomes the viceroy, he thought, okay, I don't exactly understand why I'm in this position, but God obviously put me in this position. Then his brothers come and he realizes, aha, my family that was going to come and bow down to me, they're going to come under my care. So I'm above them, caring for them, giving them food, helping them. So he makes this clear. Yosef then tells his brothers. So it's so interesting that we see in a situation that we're in so long, sometimes so many years, we have no clue why it's going on this way. We don't understand it because we don't see where it's going. We have to do our part. We don't know where it's going, but we just have to say, God, you are here with me. This is your plan. What can I do here? So then he tells his brothers that they should tell their father Yaakov that since God made him a master over all of Egypt, he should, and it says, descend to me, do not delay. Yaakov and his family were to come without delay to Egypt. Now this begins the next part of the exile. So far we had Yosef in exile by himself, but he rose to a great position. Then we have the brothers who are not free to come and go as they wish. That's up to the viceroy, who turns out to be Yosef. But now Yaakov and the entire family are coming to Egypt. So the descent of Yaakov and his family in Egypt, why is it descent? Because of the nature of Egypt is down for them. The descent of Yaakov and his family into Egypt was dependent on Yosef's being the master there. In other words, Yosef said not only that his being sold was a cause for them to come to Egypt, but that by making him master over Egypt, God made it possible for them to descend. The purpose of the Egyptian exile could now be realized. So this is a whole plan that God had, that the Jews would go into exile. Yosef knew that he had to bring his family down to Egypt, as his dreams had showed him. Even before he was sold by his brothers to Egypt, his dreams showed him that under his leadership, his family had to become one, dedicated to one purpose. So now that his family was not spread out with different feelings about Yosef, about Benjamin, about their father, they had to come one, dedicated to one purpose. This obviously had to do with going into Egypt. They would come together and go into Egypt. Now, do we understand exile? So, on an essential level, oneness exists among our entire people. We learn they are all complementary and share one Father. Because of this common root in the one God, all Israel are called brothers in the full sense of the word. This is another place where we need to rise above our feelings, because there is one God, and we are all part of that one God. We are not what it seems to be, each one separated. And when we know that we have a common root in the one God, then we all know, all Israel knows, that we're brothers in the full sense of the word, that we're all connected in God. Now, the time will come when all people in the world will see more deeply and recognize that God is the creator of every person who is made in God's image. So everyone will ultimately see this. But this was and is the position and the responsibility that God gave to the Jewish people, to remind people that there is one God and that we're all part of that God and that God is in charge. Yehuda, when he came strongly forward with complete determination and self-sacrifice to communicate his intention to trade himself for Benjamin, that changed the situation and revealed that the cruel tyrant was actually his brother. So Yehuda's strong action had tremendous repercussions. Seems like one person is going to say, this is what has to be. What's going to come out of that? If you look at things according to logic, you would think, are you crazy? You know how many of them there are? What are you talking about? Who do you think you are? But that's not how we're supposed to live our lives. We have to stand up with, determination. This is what I have to do. This is what I am here to do. And I need to do what I'm doing. And as that continues, what happens is that Yosef could no longer restrain himself, and that the truth is revealed, and God's oneness and God being in charge of the whole plan becomes revealed. So after years of separation, the brothers embraced, kissed each other, and spoke freely. And only then Yaakov's sons returned to their father with the message that Yosef was alive. And Yaakov descended to Egypt to join him. establishing oneness and unity between all the Jews in his whole family. Now, this spiral touched off by Yehuda's approach to Joseph had larger ramifications. The Zohar understands their union as symbolizing the approach of the physical world to the spiritual world. This is something that we need to know. We are souls in bodies, and we're not only dealing with the physical world. They thought they were dealing with the physical world. This viceroy, he's the one with the food. Got to deal with him. But it turns out that when Yehuda comes to Yosef, that the spiritual and the physical are connecting. What does this mean? In essence, the world at large is at one with God. This is the meaning of the phrase, God is one. When we say Shema, it doesn't mean that there's just one God, like there's all of us and one God. No, but that all existence is at one with him. So all there is God, and we are at one with God. Otherwise, we look at it as the physical is everything. Oh yeah, and there's a God out there. No. Oh yeah, he's one. It's only one of them, but he's out there. There's no he's out there. What's happening is that all existence is one with God. All there is God. But the oneness that pervades creation is not yet openly revealed. On the contrary, the world appears to exist as a collection of separate entities. Everybody seems separate from each other. Now, the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe says it's proper to say before prayer, Hareini mekabel alai mitzvah taseh shel v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. I hereby accept upon myself the positive commandment, love your fellow man as yourself. Now, showing love for our fellow man prepares a person to intensify our relationship with God. That's why saying it is strong. Showing love for our fellow man prepares a person to intensify our relationship with God. And a genuine commitment to all mankind requires true selflessness. And this is the approach that should characterize our relationship with God. A selflessness, saying God is the one. Whatever it is I can do for you, I'm grateful to be able to do that. In other words, to have this way of expressing the inner oneness that exists between people becomes a catalyst to achieve oneness in the world at large, allowing the material world to serve as a medium for the expression of spiritual truth. So when I'm saying I accept on myself the positive mitzvah to love my fellow as myself, and we all love each other, we love our people, we love each other, we love each other as individuals, and we say it and dedicate ourselves. The point is that we realize that we're all part of the one God, that our soul essence is in the one God. So in that place, we are all actually one. All there is one. And our knowing that changes our whole way of life, of how we see things. So what were Yaakov and his sons to do to show this oneness in Egypt? So we always want to live with showing oneness. Now, although settling in Egypt involved a descent into exile, and Egypt was a morally depraved land, was a place of idol worship. It was a place of not a good place. Yaakov and his sons, what did they do when they went there? Because God was bringing them to this place that was morally depraved. Yaakov and his sons established a model of spirituality, of spiritually oriented existence there. In other words, they were not supposed to just blend in to the values that were not right. They were supposed to live Torah values, live the values that God wants, and know that we are one. So Pharaoh, by divine providence, granted them the finest portion of the land, promising the best of Egypt will be yours, because at that time, the Pharaoh was dependent on Joseph. So he said, of course, your family should come. We're going to give them everything good. Don't worry about anything. As we later see, that goes on for a certain amount of time. Now, Yaakov and his sons made maximum use of this opportunity to live, to make a home, to be a model of spiritually oriented living. That was their job. So they weren't supposed to either say, what are we doing here? We didn't want to come here. Supposed to say, God is sending us here. What can we do here to live in a way that is meaningful in the way that God wants? So our rabbis explained that these were Yaakov's best years. Throughout his life, Yaakov worked to express spiritual values within the day-to-day realities of ordinary living. And in Egypt, he was given the opportunity, the ability to bring this ideal into fruition. People were learning Torah, people were living together as Jews. They were living who they were. They did not get pulled down. Or that was their work, not to get pulled down, to be who they are meant to be. Just like we saw with Joseph, that he didn't allow himself to be pulled down. He kept working on transcendence and going forward with trust in God to do what is the right time. So this is, living in this kind of way is not only seen in times where godliness is openly apparent, but the situation told in this Parsha begins the ultimate of concealment, because the Jews were going into exile. Yehuda did not know he was speaking to Joseph. He thought he was addressing the Egyptian viceroy, and he had to plead for Binyamin's freedom. Despite the weakness of his position, Yehuda advanced in the direction of oneness, and his approach led to the revelation that the Egyptian ruler was Joseph. But Yehuda went forward with strength in his clear values. So we have to keep going forward with strength in our values. In these days, although today Jews may experience the need for the assistance of non-Jewish authorities for their security, they must realize that there is a subtle inner dynamic at work. It is not an Egyptian who creates our destiny. It says, there's a quote from the Torah, the hearts of kings and officers are in the hands of God. So we may ask for help with something, but God is the one who is in charge of who does what. So God, and not the other nations, controls the fate of our people as a whole and of each individual in particular. Our trust in God is the basis of our ability to move forward with strength. Our conduct and choice of priorities should be clearly evaluated. We come from who we are: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the sons of Jacob, the Torah. Our conduct and choices of priorities need to be evaluated. There's no need to accept the standards of the world at large. We have to come with our own standards because we are role models for the world. By emulating Yehuda's example and striving toward oneness within our present situation, living with God's purpose for us, along with the guidance of our Torah values, we can initiate a sequence that will lead to the open expression of our world's godly nature. That's our aim, to bring the knowledge of the oneness of God into the world. That is our responsibility. And the fact that there are people in the world that don't like that, they don't want there to be one God revealed in the world, they would rather have their own power, is irrelevant to us. We have to do what is ours to do. So we are bringing into the world the open expression of our world's godly nature. Why would Jacob be willing to go to Egypt? He knew that this was the destiny of his people, and he had been shown this had been shown to his grandfather Abraham. So you could say he didn't want to go, but did he go kicking and screaming? No, he didn't go kicking and screaming. Kicking and screaming is what people do when they say it's not fair, and God, you didn't do this, and why did you do this? And I don't think you did it anyway, and kicking and screaming. And that is not transcendence in any way. So Abraham knew that God was bringing him to Egypt. So he didn't kick and scream. And God gave him guidance. During the journey to Egypt, Yaakov had a vision in which God reassured him, do not fear to descend to Egypt, and promised, I will descend to Egypt with you, and I will surely have you ascend. I heard a little clip, a little video yesterday about someone who was a Holocaust survivor. He was very young, and he was in camps, and then he went on a death march. But he remembered that his father said to him, God never leaves a Jew alone. God is always with a Jew. And he said that he kept saying that to himself. I'm not alone. God is with me. I'm not alone. God is with me. And he survived that. He survived that. So when God promises to Yaakov, when he's going really into the first major exile, he promises, don't be afraid to go to Egypt. I will descend to Egypt with you, and I will surely have you ascend. And we are now in the last exile, and God's promise is still true. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. I will surely have you ascend, that we will come out of exile, completely come out of exile. So although Yaakov realized what he could achieve in Egypt, he was reluctant to go there, because prosperity in exile, even prosperity that is used to create a model of spiritually oriented existence, is not the goal of a Jew's life. A Jew's true life, in other words, you do the best you can to bring out the goodness spiritually and materially where you are. But a Jew's true life is in Eretz Yisrael. And more particularly, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, as it will exist in the era of redemption. This is the promise that Yaakov received from God, that his descendants would be redeemed from Egypt and live in the land of Israel together with Mashiach. So why then did Yaakov descend to Egypt? Because he appreciated that the redemption has to be brought about by the divine service of people. So we have to do our part to make it clear that this is a godly world, and that we have the responsibility to make the knowledge of God come out into the world. That's ours. We have to take that responsibility. And so Yaakov's life was dedicated to this purpose. And like Yaakov, this is our purpose, to make the awareness of God in this world, to stand up for God's truth, true justice, love, and kindness in the way that God wants it to be. And we have this purpose. So as we've seen, this Parsha, which is the turning point of the whole people going into exile is also full of role modeling, from Yosef to Yehuda to Yaakov, to saying, I have to stand up to do what's right and going to bring out what is right and what is true. And they all do this. So the establishment of a spiritually oriented society amidst material prosperity gives us a foretaste of the redemption and prepares the world for a time when God's presence will become revealed as the true reality. And may it be so
Today.
now, immediately.